Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and in today's video let's talk about those lengthy arrivals like that one over here in Frankfurt, where they make you fly 30 miles into one direction, then a flight back, and then you've got a vector lag in the middle anyway. The topic of today's video is going to be how to vector yourself for the approach in case there is no air traffic control available to do it for you. Now this one is going to be relevant for all of you pilots flying offline, as well as for those of you flying online with no ATC available. Now, before we deal with how to actually fly an approach like that, let's quickly go into a couple of very basics. So, if we look at that chart over here, we can see that red ring over here saying ARP. That's the indication of the MSA, and this one tells us that it's around the airport, and that ring is 25 miles wide. So that gives you an idea of how long this arrival actually is. In the real Frankfurt, they use these things to create separation between aircraft, so they make you fly out like really far, and air traffic control will at some point, when they see that there's space for you in the arrival, they're going to turn you inbound early. Now, that also means air traffic control is going to manage your altitude and pretty much everything for you. So, as a pilot, you just sit there and make those inputs that air traffic control gives you a reality. Now, we do have that same arrival programmed right now. And now let's talk about a couple of basics of vectoring an airplane for the approach. We're going to start our descent over here, going down to 5,000 at first. And we're going to set our QNH. Why 5,000? Basically because that is above the MSA. You can see 4,300 is our MSA over there, and we want to stay above that. Now, in the real world, there are also lower altitudes that air traffic control can clear you to, the so-called minimum radar vectoring altitudes, but that is just a very small excursion. So, for example, when we go onto the reference charts over here, then often you can find applicable charts in the Jefferson database. Not right now, it seems. Does look like. Come on, bring that chart up for me, please. Okay, looks like it doesn't want to do it. Oh, here we go. But it looks like Jefferson doesn't have these charts for Frankfurt right now. Okay, that's unfortunate. But the general consensus there is that minimum radar vectoring altitudes can be lower than the MSA. However, since those are not always published, as you can just see, we should not rely on those. But indeed, we are going to use the MSA over here, and we are going to descend just on top of the MSA. Now, the next thing that is going to be relevant for us is which speeds could you typically expect, and when could you typically expect the base turn and the final turn, because that is the really important things that matter for us over here. Now, first of all, let's start with the speeds. ICAO standard speeds are somewhere around 220 knots on the downwind, 180 on the base, and then 160 on the final. Now, air traffic control, depending on local regulations, can and will deviate from that. However, for that purpose, let's just assume that we want to be at 220 before we start our base turn, and we want to be at 180 before we start our final turn. So that is going to give you a rough idea of what speeds to fly in order to make such self-radar vectoring realistic. Now, let's talk about how to actually do it. So, first of all, where is ATC going to turn you base? Now, for that, we need to have a look at the actual approach that we do plan to fly. And for us today, that is going to be the ILS 25 left at Frankfurt Airport. Quick look at the approach chart does tell us that the final approach fix, or the final approach point, is at Delta Foxtrot 620 in 4,000. So that is what we're going to aim for. Now, depending on the country in which you fly, air traffic control can either be really efficient and vector you in just shy of that waypoint, so that you're established on the final approach course by the time you pass that particular waypoint, or they might vector you in with like 4 or 5 miles to spare, which is what they do in a lot of the, let's call it, less first world countries. Now, both is going to work. If you aim for approximately 2 or 3 nautical miles prior to the final approach fix, that is typically going to work out rather well. Now, for us, the final approach fix, as we saw, is Delta Foxtrot 620, which is the waypoint we got over here. Now, what we're going to do is we do plan on the downwind to be abeam the field like we are right now, approximately at 7,000 feet above the ground. as that is, in most airliners, going to provide a nice profile to come in, fly like 10 miles out, base 10 miles in. So 7,000 abeam the field is typically a good position you want to be in. Now, what we are going to do is that we are going to start our base turn when we are just abeam the final approach point. So when we're exactly abeam Delta Foxtrot 620, that is when we're going to start our base turn. Traffic control might take an extra mile or something, but you will see that since we are still flying at a rather high speed of 250 right now and 220 in a few moments, that is going to work pretty well. So what we'll do now is we'll start our speed reduction towards 220 knots. And then, as soon as we're abeam Delta Foxtrot 620, we're going to start our right-hand turn. Now, the way air traffic control typically vectors you is that you're going to get a roughly 90-degree angle turn onto the base, and then a 30-degree intercept to the final. Now, what does that mean for the numbers we're going to use? Well, we're flying roughly 070 right now, so 70 plus 90 makes 160 degrees for the right-hand turn. So we're going to turn right, heading 160, as soon as we're abeam Delta Foxtrot 620. Let's go ahead and set that up. And here we go, 160 is in. We are abeam 620. So let's go on ahead and select. Alright, now, as we are on the inbound turn, let's go ahead and descend to the platform altitude, which is going to be 4,000 feet, like so. And then we can go ahead and clean up our flight management computer. So what I'm going to do is I will simply extend the center line out of Delta Foxtrot 620, like that. Alright, and execute. But that is just operating technique of the airplane. That is not necessarily required for the self-vectoring. Now what we can see is, with that turn commenced, we are now approximately 3 miles on the lateral distance here from our final approach fix. Now let's go ahead and reduce our speed towards 180 knots, which is what we would typically expect from air traffic control at a point like this. And then we're going to start our final turn appropriately. Now, what does appropriately mean? Basically, we're looking for a 30-degree intercept heading. So, for our final approach course of 246, that means we're looking for a 220 degrees. When are we going to start the turn? Well, if your ground speed is under control, if you're at 200 knots or less, then basically starting at approximately 1.5 miles from the center line, 2 miles to 1.5 miles, the marker down here helps very well with that, is going to work pretty well. So we're approaching 1.5 nautical miles, as we can see down here, which we have right now. So let's turn right heading 220, and then we are going to arm the approach mode in order to intercept the final approach. Like so. You can see Volok has already captured, and if you look down here at the track line, then you can see that we are going to end up perfectly on the final approach fix. Now, in order for that to work, turning final from a 90-degree angle at approximately 1.5 nautical miles, you can do 2 nautical miles as well. You really got to make sure that your airspeed is under control, so you want to have like 180 knots. The faster you fly, the greater the radius of your turn is going to become, and therefore the earlier you need turning. But usually approximately 180 knots is roughly what you can expect from air traffic control, and what is going to work rather well. On the final then, they will usually slow you down to approximately 160, and like that they're going to hand you over to the tower. Alright, and that is basically how to vector yourself for an approach. So to summarize that once again, downwind, you're looking for approximately 7,000 feet abeam field. That works fine for the vast majority of airplane types. You want to start your final turn when you're at approximately 220 knots and abeam the final approach point. So in our case that was Delta Foxtrot 260, but that really depends on your airport, of course. But you start your final, or you start your base turn, abeam the point, then you start speed reduction, towards 180 on the base, and then about 1.5 nautical miles from centerline you start your final turn. And that usually works very, very well. Intercept angles, 30 degrees usually for the localizer, so in case of our runway 25, we're looking for a heading of 220 over there, and like that we can fully establish ourselves. Alright, so, sounds easy? Well, go ahead and find out for yourself. That's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for flying along. I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, do let me know in the comments below. Finally, if you're up for more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and be sure to leave a like on YouTube, as it does really help out with the algorithms. I would like to say thank you very much now and hope to see you all again in the future. And in the meantime, if you really love what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching and see you all again on the next one.